So I recently watched a movie called Datra or Dachra. It is a Tunisian horror movie, and it is the first horror film that I have heard of and that I have seen coming out of the Middle East that is actually somewhat decent. I remember watching an Iranian horror film, the name of which escapes my memory, and it was terribly done, regardless of the fact that it did have good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm not really entirely sure how trustworthy Rotten Tomatoes is. The film was terribly done, and it was very boring and wasn't scary at all. Really wasn't. But this horror film, Dachra, this one I would say is actually decent. First, I want to tell you guys what I liked about the film, and then I'll tell you what I didn't like about the movie. So, the film was well shot. I liked the color of the film. It used a lot of dim colors. I think one of the worst things that you can do for any film actually is to have excessively bright coloration on the screen. It's a terrible idea. It really is horrible. I remember seeing this type of color in a film the first time actually, in the movie Indiana Jones, the fourth Indiana Jones movie. I saw it in theater when it came out. I'm pretty sure I saw it on the opening weekend actually, and it was just awful. That was the very first time that I saw such color, such contrast done on a movie. It was excessively bright, and it was horrible because it took away from the atmosphere of the film. So, for example, when you watch the film, when you watch the movie Saving Private Ryan, that film uses a lot of dim coloration. A lot of dim coloration. And what makes that so effective and so helpful is that color, it dims the film and it conveys the type of emotional atmosphere that you want the audience to experience. If Saving Private Ryan had really bright color and contrasts, it would not have the same psychological effect. It's like when you watch the film The Matrix. In the movie The Matrix, the film has a certain coloration. There's a dim green that is ubiquitous throughout the movie, and that really conveys the message that you are in the Matrix, hence the green color. And it's very dim, giving you the feeling that you are in sort of in limbo land, that you are in a dark place, that you are not in a good place actually. So I liked the coloration in this film. I thought it was well done. And another thing that I liked about this film is that it's in the Middle East. It gives you a different flavor, so to speak. We're so used to horror films being done in America or Canada or Great Britain. I know there's a lot of British horror films out there. Some of them are good, some of them are meh. But this is a Middle Eastern horror film, and so for me, it's interesting. It's in Arabic, and yeah, I would say that's a plus. It makes it more interesting. It's kind of like watching Apocalypto. It's a film in a different language, and it does have some very horrific things that are depicted. And the other thing that I liked about this film was the subject matter. The subject matter of this movie was one of cannibalism and cults. That's what it's about. It's about a cannibalistic cult in the wilderness of Tunisia. And that's not really something that is depicted very much in horror films. I mean, you have like cannibalism in movies, in slasher films, but that's really just a slasher film. It's just the purpose of a slasher film is to depict violence for the sake of violence. That's it. And I myself am not interested in a movie like that. I'm not interested in a film like that because it's just not interesting. It's meaningless. There's no meaning. There's no subject matter. There's no, there's nothing really important that's being pointed out. Whereas when you're dealing with a cult, then you're dealing with an ideology. You're dealing with something that can be pinpointed in reality. There's an ideology, there's a worldview, and every single cannibal that's ever existed has his own worldview of the world, or else he wouldn't be doing the horrible things that he's doing. It's like the Native Americans, there was a lot of cannibalism amongst the Native Americans. There was a lot of human sacrifice and heart plucking. You see this quite vividly in Aztec artwork. But there was an ideology behind that. It wasn't just being done for the sake of it being done. Yes, the people doing it were absolutely sick and evil and sadistic, but they had an ideology that they used as the underpinning for their actions. And to me, that's much more realistic. To depict that is much more realistic and much more accurate, as opposed to just having a slasher film about some dysfunctional family in the middle of the California mountains or in Death Valley somewhere. So this movie, it has ideology. There's a cult, and I like it when films depict cults. I think cults, the subject matter of a cult is extremely fascinating to me. I have been interested in cults probably since I was in junior high, when I first started debating leftist and crazy hippies, and I've always been interested in the subject of cults, fighting cults, exposing cults, researching about cults, even little cults that seem completely insignificant I have found to be fascinating. And so when a film depicts a cult in a hyper-realistic way, I find that to be just something that really garners my attention. The acting in the film is also pretty decent, especially the female actress. That's redundant. The actress, I think she does a very good job in playing her character. Now, what I did not like about this movie is that the film is almost 2 hours long. It's almost 2 hours, and it spends so much time with just dialogue. And the film has its good moments, don't get me wrong, but there are so many scenes of just people talking that there's not enough time to actually have a good ending. The ending in this movie was terrible. The beginning was good. The middle is okay, whatever. There's a lot of talking. But then the way that the film ended, I felt that should have been the middle of the movie, not the ending. So where the film ends should have been near the middle of the film, not the ending. So the film it feels so inconclusive. It just ends with this very, very confusing note. It's just, it's like the film was almost 2 hours long. So you would think they would use a lot of that time to actually have points of the film that are very attention grabbing, and it just doesn't do that. It just has an interesting beginning where you're just roughly introduced into the cult, and then you have this huge middle part of the film where it's just talking and talking and talking and some interesting scenes, and then talking and talking, and then an interesting scene pops up, and then talking and talking and talking, and then it just kind of ends. It's like you just leave the audience feeling pretty cheated, actually. I feel like when I'm watching the film that the director got lazy and just wanted to end it. And man, there's a scene in the film that's like 10 minutes long where it's just explaining to you everything. There's a lot of explanatory material in the movie. And that's one sign to me of lazy directing, when you have too much explanation. I think that the film should explain itself. Like the scenes, the actions done by the characters should explain the story. You don't have to have all this dialogue explaining everything. That's a sign of bad directing. I think that, yeah, characters should be allowed to explain the film through their actions and their words at the same time, but not have these long, drawn out explanatory scenes that are just very dry and mundane. I think that's bad. It's not very good. A great example of a film that allows the story to unravel itself is the film City of Life and Death. It's a great example of showing the audience and demonstrating to the audience the story as opposed to explaining the story to the audience. A good sign of intelligent directing or effective directing is when the director does not underestimate the intelligence of the audience and allows the audience to figure out the story for themselves. I think that's very effective directing. And every film that I have enjoyed has allowed the audience just to see the story for what it is. Some explanation is good. At times it's very necessary, but I don't think that should be a core of the film. And this is where the film really fails. But other than that, other than my criticism, I would say that the film was a decent film, especially for a Middle Eastern movie. I honestly have never seen a Middle Eastern movie that I've liked. This was the first time that I watched a Middle Eastern film that was decent. Because Middle Eastern films, even Israeli movies, they tend to be very boring with lots of just dry dialogue. Anyway, yeah, that's the film. It's not the best movie, but it is definitely the kind of film that you would watch one time, find it interesting, and then you wouldn't watch it again. It's just one of those films. Anyway, you guys just heard some Theo Wachi. God bless.